Growing up, I always knew I wasn't the favorite child. My younger brother Daniel was the golden boy. He could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, while I was constantly told I needed to try harder or be more like him. If Daniel got a C on a test, it was blamed on the teacher. If I got an A, it wasn't good enough because Daniel had gotten an A once in 3rd grade. That kind of comparison became the soundtrack of my childhood. By the time we were teenagers, it was crystal clear. Daniel was destined to inherit everything. My parents openly talked about how he would take care of the family legacy, while I was expected to make my own way. It hurt. But I told myself I would build a life separate from their favoritism. I worked hard, got into college on scholarships, and started carving out my career without their help. Daniel, on the other hand, had his tuition paid in full, got a brand new car at 18, and moved into an apartment my parents co-signed and furnished for him. I thought maybe when we grew older things would balance out. Maybe they'd see that I was responsible, independent, and capable. But I was wrong. Their favoritism only deepened with time. A few years ago, my parents sat me down for a family discussion. They casually informed me that they had already signed over the family home, the vacation property, and their savings accounts to Daniel. He was now the legal owner of everything. The justification? Daniel will take care of us in retirement, they said, smiling proudly as if it was the most logical plan in the world. Meanwhile, they offered me nothing.
Not a share.
Not a trust. Not even a token gesture. I sat there stunned. I had always expected some level of imbalance, but to be completely cut out like I didn't even exist was brutal. When I asked why, my mother said, "You're independent. You don't need our help. Daniel does. He'll carry the family name." It wasn't just about money. It was about what it represented. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated like the backup child. They had chosen their favorite and left me out of the picture entirely. I walked away from that conversation with a pit in my stomach, but I tried to swallow the pain and keep my distance. I told myself I'd be fine. After all, I didn't need their estate to survive. I had my own life. But a year later, everything changed. My parents' perfect plan started falling apart, and suddenly, I wasn't so unnecessary anymore. At first, I didn't hear much about my parents or Daniel. I had limited contact with them, choosing to keep my peace and focus on my own career. I'd bought my own house, was steadily climbing in my job, and had finally reached a point where I felt comfortable financially. Meanwhile, Daniel lived large. He bragged on social media about the new boat he bought, the luxury vacations he took, and the expensive renovations he made to the family home that was now legally his. My parents were right there in the photos, grinning from ear to ear. It stung to see, but I reminded myself, they made their choice. I wasn't part of it. Then, about a year later, the cracks began to show. I got a phone call from my mother one evening. Her voice was strained, almost panicked. She asked if I could lend them some money to cover unexpected expenses. I asked what she meant, and after some hesitation, she admitted Daniel had gotten into some financial trouble. Turns out, my golden child brother had been living far beyond his means. The boat, the vacations, the renovations, all of it was funded by loans and credit cards. He assumed that since he owned all the property now, he could just refinance or cash out equity whenever he needed. But he had mismanaged everything so badly that he was drowning in debt. And because my parents had signed everything over to him, they had tied their own future to his recklessness. Their retirement savings gone, the family vacation house mortgaged to the hilt, their plan of relying on Daniel to support them shattered. Now, suddenly, they were looking at me. The child they'd written off as independent, the one they had told didn't need help. When I asked them point blank what happened to the estate they signed over, my father sighed and said, "Well, Daniel's had some setbacks, but you've always been the responsible one. We knew we could count on you." I almost laughed. Count on me? After cutting me out of everything? After years of favoritism and dismissing me like I was just a backup plan? My mother chimed in with, "Family takes care of each other. We raised you, we gave you everything we could. Now it's your turn to step up." That was the moment my patience snapped. I reminded them that they had not given me everything. In fact, they had given me nothing, not a dime toward college, not a car, not a home, not an inheritance. Everything I had built on my own. And now when their golden child had burned through all their wealth, They wanted me to swoop in and save the day. I told them I needed time to think, but deep down, I already knew what my answer would be. For a few days, I mulled it over. I thought about every conversation, every slight. Every holiday where Daniel was showered with gifts while I got a token sweater or a book I didn't want. I thought about the way my parents used to say things like, "You'll understand when you're older," or "Daniel just needs more help than you." And how they framed my independence as a reason to give me less. Not because they were struggling, but because Daniel was always their priority. But I also thought about how, despite all that, I had worked hard to build my life. I had a steady income, some savings, and no debt. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I realized that if I stepped in, I'd essentially be throwing my hard-earned money into a black hole, trying to fix mistakes I hadn't made. Finally, I decided to meet them face-to-face to make things clear. I drove over to the family home. Well, Daniel's home now. The place was nearly unrecognizable. Daniel had remodeled it into something that looked like a wannabe luxury mansion. But it was gaudy, overdone, and screaming of poor financial decisions. When I walked inside, my parents greeted me like I was their savior arriving to rescue them. They put on smiles, offered me tea, and acted overly sweet in a way I hadn't seen in years. My brother Daniel wasn't there, which was a relief. But I could see traces of his recklessness everywhere. Expensive electronics, new furniture, piles of unopened Amazon packages. Finally, I asked them to sit down. Said I need to be honest. I can't and won't bail you out. I've spent years building my life with no help from you. You gave everything to Daniel, and now you want me to pick up the pieces. That's not fair. My father looked offended. We did what we thought was best. Daniel is family. He'll get back on his feet. You're being selfish. That word, selfish, hit me hard. It was the same label they had always used whenever I dared to push back against their favoritism. I took a deep breath and replied, selfish. I've been supporting myself since I was 18. You didn't pay for my college. You didn't help me buy a house. You didn't help me when I had medical bills. And now you're telling me I'm selfish for not fixing Daniel's mess? My mother's face tightened, and her tone turned sharp. We thought you'd understand. Family helps family. What's the point of your success if you can't share it with us? That broke something in me. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. Instead, I felt angry that they still saw me as nothing but a backup plan, someone to clean up the wreckage of their poor choices. I stood up and said, "You made your decision when you signed everything over to Daniel. Now you have to live with it. Don't call me again asking for money, because the answer will always be no." My mother gasped. My father muttered something about me being cold and ungrateful. But I didn't stay to argue. I walked out of that gaudy house and felt a strange mix of grief and relief. It felt like I had closed a chapter in my life, one where I was always the afterthought. But what I didn't realize was that this was only the beginning. Because when I refused, Daniel and my parents didn't just accept it quietly. They decided to go on the offensive. The fallout from that conversation didn't take long. Within 2 days, I started getting messages, not just from my parents, but from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years. My aunt called to say she'd heard I was abandoning my poor parents in their time of need. A cousin messaged me on Facebook asking how I could be so cold-hearted, after everything my parents supposedly sacrificed for me. At first, I was confused. Then it became clear. My parents and Daniel were spreading their own version of events. They painted themselves as helpless victims who had selflessly given everything to their children, only for their ungrateful youngest child to turn their back on them. The most galling part, it conveniently left out that they'd signed over everything to Daniel. According to their narrative, the estate transfer was just fairness because I was already successful, while Daniel needed stability. They twisted it to make it sound noble, like it was all part of some carefully considered plan. Rather than favoritism and poor judgment, I ignored the first few guilt trip messages, but the flood didn't stop. Some relatives even suggested I should just chip in a few hundred a month, as if it were pocket change. What they didn't understand was that it wasn't about the money, it was about principle. Supporting my parents now would mean rewarding their favoritism and letting them dodge responsibility for the very choices that landed them in this mess. Then Daniel himself called me. His tone wasn't apologetic or even polite. It was entitled Dripping with Arrogance. He said, "Listen, you've always been the responsible one. You've got savings, a good job, no kids. Mom and Dad need help. Stop being so stubborn and just step up." I was stunned. Step up? I reminded him that he was the one who had been handed a fully paid-off house and most of our parents' assets. I asked him how it was fair that he had blown through everything in a few short years and now expected me to clean up his mess. His response, "That's not my problem. They're our parents. If you don't want to help, you'll regret it when they're gone." Look like the bad child, not me. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just spoiled, he was manipulative. He was counting on the same guilt my parents had always used to keep me in line. And he was betting I'd fold the way I always used to when I was younger. But this time, I didn't. I told him flat out, "You wanted the house, the money, the inheritance? You got it all. Now it's on you. Don't ever call me about this again." Then I hung up. For a while, things went quiet. I thought maybe they'd gotten the message, but I underestimated how far they were willing to go. Because a week later, I showed up at work one morning to find out that Daniel had posted a long rant about me on social media. He tagged me, our extended family, even some mutual friends from high school. He called me selfish, greedy, and ungrateful. He claimed I was living the good life, while our parents were suffering in poverty. That's when things turned ugly. People I hadn't spoken to in years started chiming in, some defending me, others piling on. It felt like my personal life had turned into some twisted public drama, and that's when I realized if I didn't take control of the narrative, they were going to ruin my reputation. When I saw the rant Daniel posted about me, my stomach dropped. He wasn't just venting, he was carefully trying to paint a picture where I was the villain, abandoning my poor aging parents, while he was the dutiful son carrying all the weight. Except, the truth was very different. He wasn't carrying anything, eh? He was living in a house that was essentially a free gift, burning through money that never should have been his alone, and now trying to shame me into taking responsibility for the fallout. I decided I wasn't going to sit back quietly. For years, I'd stayed silent whenever my parents favored Daniel. I'd swallowed the unfairness, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But this time, they'd crossed a line, dragging my name through the mud publicly to guilt me into submission. So, I wrote my own post. I kept it factual, calm, and brutally honest. I explained that 3 years ago, my parents had signed over their fully paid-off house, their investments, and even some savings to Daniel, leaving me with nothing. I explained how they had told me I didn't need anything because I was already successful. While Daniel deserved help because he couldn't hold down a stable job, I pointed out that they hadn't asked me before doing this, they had simply decided. Then I wrote, "Now that their plan has backfired and the money is gone, they expect me to step in and pay for their retirement. I will not. I did not benefit from their choices, and I will not take responsibility for them. Actions have consequences." I didn't attack them personally. I didn't name-call. I just laid out the facts, plain and simple. The response was overwhelming. Some people who had originally sided with Daniel messaged me privately, saying they hadn't known the full story. Others commented directly, calling him out for twisting the narrative. A few relatives stayed silent, clearly embarrassed for having judged me without asking. And Daniel, he blew up. He started commenting angrily on my post, calling me a liar, saying I was twisting things. But the more he ranted, the worse he looked, especially when a few family members chimed in, confirming they remembered the big celebration dinner. When my parents signed everything over to him, the story started unraveling fast. Meanwhile, my parents tried calling me nonstop. I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself not to scream at them, and I knew they'd try to guilt-trip me again, so I blocked their numbers. For the first time in my life, I wasn't letting them control the narrative. I wasn't letting guilt dictate my choices. And as much as Daniel and my parents hated it, the truth was finally out in the open. But here's the thing about exposing people who thrive on manipulation. They don't just back down when caught. They double down. Sure enough, my parents decided to up the stakes in a way I didn't see coming. When blocking their numbers didn't work, my parents showed up at my house. Unannounced. They stood on my porch like it was the most natural thing in the world, holding grocery bags as if they planned to stay for dinner. I didn't open the door. I watched from the window as they rang the bell over and over, then sat down on my steps like squatters. Eventually, my dad shouted, "You owe us. After all we've done for you, this is how you treat your parents." That was the breaking point. For years, I'd let guilt run my life, but standing there, watching them try to bully me into submission, I finally felt free. They weren't entitled to my money. They weren't entitled to my time. They weren't entitled to me. I called the police not because I wanted to escalate things, but because I wanted to send a message. When the officers arrived, my parents were furious, but they left. The silence after they drove off was the calmest I'd felt in months. The next day, I sent one final message to both of them and Daniel. You made your choice when you gave everything to him. You don't get to rewrite history now that it didn't work out. Do not contact me again. I am done. And I blocked them everywhere: phone, email, social media. For the first time, I went truly no contact. It's been months now. At first, I felt a mix of guilt and relief. But the longer the silence stretches, the lighter I feel. My life isn't full of drama anymore. I don't wake up to manipulative voicemails or angry rants. Do I miss having a family? Sure. But the truth is, I never really had one. Not the kind that loved unconditionally. They made their choice and I made mine. And honestly, choosing myself was the best decision I've ever made. Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more.